Welcome to the Doyenne of Death podcast, funeral planning for those who don't plan to die. It's all about end-of-life issues and getting the conversation started about our 100% mortality rate. This series is hosted by Gail Rubin, certified thanatologist and the Doyenne of Death. A doyenne is a woman who's considered senior in a group and knows a lot about a particular subject. So here to talk about the subjects we sometimes avoid is author, speaker, and the Doyenne of Death, Gail Rubin.
Welcome to the Doyenne of Death podcast. I'm Gail Rubin, your hostess with the mostess, and very pleased to have with me today Greg Barnsdale. He's the author of the book, Do Not Ignore Your Mortality. And Greg, what's the subtitle?
The subtitle is Practical Advice from a Funeral and Financial Insider.
Well, that tells you everything you need to know about our conversation today. When you work in the funeral business and the financial advising business, you've probably seen a number of people who either have a funeral they got to plan right away and they haven't planned ahead, and just what the difference is when you do plan ahead. Of course, I'm a big proponent, supporter of planning ahead.
Yes, well, absolutely, Gail. And actually, when I joined the funeral industry as a young man in my early 20s, I saw rather quickly the vast majority of situations that were just poorly planned for, and the surviving family members were quite often beside themselves, and it was very, very difficult on them compared to the fewer number of cases where planning was done in advance, and it was just so much easier on them.
Mm-hmm. You know, in my first book in the end-of-life field was A Good Goodbye, Funeral Planning for Those Who Don't Plan to Die. And the whole point of it is of pre-planning is to reduce stress at a time of grief, minimize conflict, save money, and help people get a good goodbye. And I think your book pretty well agrees with those points as well.
Well, absolutely, yes. And actually, what I have discovered, Gail, over the last 2 years since I published this book, and this is the only one that I've published, so far anyway, but I think I have created an inspiring message that really compels people to lean into this type of planning while minds are clear. And I put it this way. I stress the fact that end-of-life planning helps reduce the stress of aging. It leaves survivors more financially and emotionally resilient. It leaves them more likely to get along and less likely to contest final wishes. It naturally results in more meaningful legacies. It often takes pressure off the courts from otherwise needing to be involved in unorganized estates. The process often helps charities because of the immense tax planning benefits of planned giving, and all these things help lift the economy.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if people can tell from, I believe, a distinctly Canadian accent. Are you in Canada?
Yes, just outside of Toronto, Ontario.
Okay. And so you've written this book with Canadian framework, but I guess it applies in the U.S. and other countries as well?
Well, it does, Gail, yes. When I created the manuscript for this book, I actually followed the proven teachings of a dragon from Dragon's Den, and I'm sure you've heard of Shark Tank.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, well, my publishing coach was one of the most famous publishing nonfiction authors in Canada who helped change the face of retirement planning 25 years ago. And using his proven strategies, I'm hoping to help change the face of post-retirement planning, as I call it.
Okay. So you have your own personal stories about facing your mortality. Not only were you in a serious car crash, but you were also had a benign brain tumor. Tell me about that.
Well, it shocked the heck out of me, to be honest with you, Gail. I initially went to my general physician after publishing this book, thinking I was just stressed out because I wasn't selling enough books and with the pain in my neck. And he said, Greg, don't worry about that. You have a large brain tumor. The recent MRI revealed this. My publishing coach suggested that I try new things, so I felt I had to be transparent. After not telling my wife for 3 days about the brain tumor, assuming it was a death sentence, I recorded a brief video and put it online, Gail, and it went viral. It has been viewed over 1.7 million times.
Wow. But what happened after you got that diagnosis?
Well, I was very, very fortunate. As you had alluded to a minute ago, the brain tumor was non-cancerous. I have since had it removed. I've also had to undergo cranial radiation treatment over the last couple of months because they couldn't remove it all because a small portion is still tightly wrapped around several facial nerves in my brainstem. But again, I'm very, very lucky. You know, there are so many people going through far worse things than what I have gone through, but it certainly gave me an experience that I thought I had seen it all, and I guess I hadn't.
Well, in fact, I recently had a experience with a friend of mine who fought glioblastoma for 4 years. So that's a very aggressive form of brain cancer. And he actually asked me to come to California to help him access medical aid in dying. And I did go there. Long story short, even though he wanted medical aid in dying and was able to get the prescription, he had a mental meltdown 2 days before we were going to do the ingestion. So he was not able to do it because you have to be mentally competent to do medical aid in dying. And I know that it's widely available in Canada. In the United States, it's currently in 12 states and the District of Columbia. What do you think about medical aid in dying, and especially when you're looking at your own mortality and planning for the end?
Well, it seems to me, Gail, that even as young children, we all crave control, especially when we learn the word no. And that lasts throughout our lifetime. And I understand much more now, actually being a part of my cousin's death last October, who decided to end his life through the MAID program because of a series of strokes that he had had. And it was such a peaceful way to die. It was the first time that I had actually been present during a MAID provision. And I told my cousin that if I were in his shoes, I may very well have made the same decision as well. But I can understand why people want that choice if their lifestyle or quality of life is just the pits and they're in pain, etc.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the things you wrote about in your book is that men don't want to discuss their mortality more so than women.
Yes, I find that very true. And in the funeral/financial planning seminars that I've been involved in with lawyers and other types of people to basically help people be more aware of these sorts of things, most of the attendees were women. And quite often it almost seemed as if they were dragging their husbands along by the ear.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, I was one of the first people to hold a death cafe in the United States back in 2012. And I find the majority of participants there are women. But then I started doing mortality movie nights where I show a movie and then we talk about it for a while. It's not a death cafe, but it does get more men to come and watch the movie and then have a conversation.
Yes, and I've seen some of your information about the mortality movies, and I wish I was closer. I wish I would live closer to you, Gail, because I would be coming out with you quite frequently, I'm sure.
Well, we can see if we can get some mortality movie nights going in Canada.
That would be great. We should talk about that for sure, because our society certainly needs to, as we're basically alluding to in this message, Gail, the most important core message of mine is the fact, and I'm sure you'd fully agree, that the time to lean into these things and get talking about them and let your family know what you want and properly plan is when minds are clear and time is plentiful.
Absolutely. I say you can only laugh about death when it's not staring you in the face. And laughter can really help break down that resistance that so many people have to talking about their mortality.
Yes, absolutely. And thinking, just commenting on something funny, I meant to mention this to you before the show. Would you like me to tell you briefly one of the funniest things, one of the quirkiest things that I had ever seen in the funeral business years ago?
Absolutely.
My coworker and I, back in the 80s, were called out to an apartment building to pick up a little old lady who had passed away. The police were there, as they typically are, and they led us up to the apartment where she was. And I don't remember the exact conversation, but the coroner had told us that this woman had died standing up.
Really?
Really, I had only seen it once, and from what the coroner had explained, she had quite severe arthritis, and her knees locked, and she was just basically in the corner of her kitchen between two walls behind her, and her head was over, and she was standing up, and
Oh
I'd
my
only ever
God.
seen it once.
Wow. That is pretty unique. Um, Something that happened this year in my life were two unexpected, unattended deaths. And it was my brother-in-law and a sister-in-law who they both lived alone in their own places. Um, and they died unexpectedly in their bathrooms. I think a lot of people die in their bathrooms. Maybe you have some insights into that. Um, and that was, and they weren't discovered for days. And I think that really shocked me more than the expected deaths that occurred on hospice. Um, any thoughts about, the unexpected death versus the more expected ones?
Well, yes. And this is a major part of my message as well, Gail, is the fact that far too many people
Three
seem to
reps.
think that this type of planning is for older people as they get older. It's not needed right away. Everything, I'm fine now. I've made it this far. I'm not going to need a will right away. We've all heard those types of comments. But, after I worked in the funeral industry full time as a funeral director, and I'm still a funeral director today, though I'm not working in that field, I worked in it 14 years in a row straight for large and small funeral homes. And then I shifted and became a financial advisor and started talking to people about their retirement planning and just found this overall theme that frustrated me. And that's why I wrote this book. But then I went back to the funeral industry as a supervisor for one of the largest mortuary agencies in all of Canada. And this organization, Gail, in one way or another, was involved in over 100 deaths per day.
Wow.
So I have worked very closely with forensics and police and fire departments and all kinds of agencies, health departments, and repatriations of deceased people all over the world. Uh, but basically, to get back to your question about sudden deaths happening, it happens all the time, but so many people are just tuned out. And I have seen situations like that where in some cases people have not been found. I think the longest time span that I had seen was, I think it was 2 or 3 months that a body had not been found.
Yeah, that is, it's a big shock.
Yes,
Um,
it can be.
and, the thing is, especially with the baby boomers and, growing older, many more living independently, they're single, they're divorced, they're widowed, and, there may not be anybody else in their household, which is why, they don't get discovered for a while. Yeah, but in both of those cases, the police were doing wellness checks because people hadn't heard from
Yes.
them in a week or so. Um, but fortunately, my brother-in-law had done estate planning. He had his will. He hadn't prearranged his disposition, but he did say he wanted to be cremated and have his ashes scattered along Route 66 because he did artwork based on landmarks along Route 66. So I'm actually going to do that in about a month. I'm going to take a trip and do that. So it's good when those who are left behind have at least some idea of what the person would want.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Because as we know, Gail, life can change in an instant. And the sooner that we can have these types of conversations, the better off these surviving family members are. And one of the things that I often stress to people, which I think really comes down to this whole aspect of finances and how much money someone has in their bank account, and many people thinking erroneously that it's not worthwhile putting a will together if they don't have much money. I stress the fact that regardless of the size of anyone's bank account, when we become an adult, even a young adult, our family members, our parents, our closest family members should at least know what we want done with our body.
Mm-hmm. Well, and let's talk a bit about the difference between wills and trusts. I'm guessing in Canada, trusts serve the same purpose as they do in the United States. But it's, and I know a lot of people think, oh, you have to have a lot of money to have a trust. But if you own a house, if you own a car, you've got some bank accounts, etc., if those are not in a trust and you have to go through probate for probating a will, assuming you have a will,
Yes.
that's public knowledge in open court.
Absolutely, Gail. And one of the core things that I stress about having a will is the fact that it is the only document whatsoever that can actually dictate and specify who you want to wrap up your life. And when you have a will in place, everything can fall into place exactly as you want it when you're no longer here. It's the final document that speaks for you. But it's important to make sure that based on your own particular situation, whether you need accounting advice, legal advice, financial planning advice, there are so many great people out there willing and able to help to save money and avoid probate costs and maintain privacy and all those sorts of things that can easily be done, but people need to lean into it and stop putting these sorts of things off.
Mm-hmm. I think there's actually something a lot of people don't know about is putting the beneficiary's name on a transfer on death deed for a house or your bank account, who's the beneficiary, or on insurance policies and things like that. And it's great to do that, and that can avoid probate when you do that. But
Yes.
you also need to make sure you keep updating those beneficiaries as time goes by.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And that's why working with a good financial advisor is very, very important. And again, regardless of the amount of money that you have, I realize that not everyone can afford a lawyer and a financial advisor and an accountant, and everybody's situation is so dramatically different. But there is such great information out there that can help people do those things and keep this type of information up to date so that when something does happen, whether it's an incapacity after a stroke or a heart attack or a death or whatever, that things will play out the way that you want.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have to take that control while we have the opportunity.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, a woman who I know, I hadn't talked to her in a while, and I actually ran into her at an event, and we sat and talked for a long time. And she said because of my work, she and her husband have death day practice sessions where they wake up in the morning and her husband says, "I'm dead. What are you going to do now?" And I just thought that was such a creative, wonderful idea for being prepared, kind of having these dry run activities. Have you
Yes.
ever heard of that?
No, I haven't, but that's very creative. I like the idea.
So in your experience, what are some of the more creative either funerals or approaches to funeral planning, financial planning have you encountered?
Well, one of the things that I wrote briefly about in my book is a casket club, which apparently and you're probably well aware of this, Gail, but I believe it was a palliative care nurse in New Zealand that started these a coffin club, I think she called it, where people
Yes.
would get together and basically make their own casket or coffin, which I thought was quite creative. But it's so refreshing talking to people like you and these other people that I'm especially meeting through LinkedIn, who are looking to really elevate this whole death positive movement, because we can't escape it. We're all getting older. We will likely become incapacitated at some point. We're certainly going to die. Why not just lean into these things? Because we can plan better and it'll take the load off. We can actually live better along the way.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, where can people find your book, Do Not Ignore Your Mortality? The subtitle is?
Practical advice from a funeral and financial insider. And they can find it, Gail, pretty well everywhere. It's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and Apple, and it's also available in an audiobook format as well. But one of the things that I wanted to stress is that I find from my experiences in the funeral and the financial planning industry, a lot of people have a hard time getting these conversations moving forward in a productive way with those they care about.
And your book will help them do that.
Well, it actually, I wish I had have put more questions in the book, but this is what I've done since then. I've created a short quiz, and I call it the Living Legacy Quiz, and it's available on my website, donotignoreyourmortality.com, for anyone to print off and use it. But it's a very, very short 5-question quiz that would take anyone a couple of minutes. But anyone completing this quiz would quickly learn that they likely have some homework to do, because they're not likely as prepared as what they should be. Also on my website is a curated list of questions, and I call them the Probing Legacy Questions. 15 basic questions to start conversations, and 15 more advanced questions to help people have more meaningful conversations in a better way with those they care about.
Great. And that is donotignoreyourmortality.com.
Correct.
Great. Any last thoughts you'd like to share?
Well, I have to admit, Gail, that I love your line of talking about sex will not make anyone pregnant and talking about death will not make anyone dead. I think it's perfect, and I'm using it all the time and giving you credit, of course.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, it's actually... What I actually say is talking about sex won't make you pregnant. Talking about funerals won't make you dead.
Ah, okay.
Same thing. Yeah,
I think
right.
it's excellent.
And with that is how I usually wrap up these discussions. So you can find resources as well at my website, agoodgoodbye.com. Greg Barnsdale, thank you for being with us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Doyenne of Death podcast. You can find episodes of this podcast and past episodes of A Good Goodbye with Gail Rubin on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. For more information on Gail's work, visit agoodgoodbye.com.